Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
My grandmother used to say that the people who make the most noise about what they deserve are usually the ones who've earned the least of it. She said it quietly, the way she said everything important. Sitting at her kitchen table in Pueblo, Colorado, with her hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, watching the mountains through the window like they owed her nothing and she expected nothing from them. That was Grandma Ruth. She didn't perform. She simply knew. I think about that now. Sitting in my car in the driveway of that same house, watching the lights on inside, hearing the laughter through the walls, knowing they started without me. I think about her hands, her coffee, her certainty. I take a breath. I pick up my folder. And I go inside. My name is Simone Adler Cruz. I'm 34 years old. I live in Denver, 45 minutes north of where I grew up, in a one-bedroom apartment with too many houseplants and a standing desk I never use standing. I'm a forensic accountant, which means I spend my professional life finding money that people insist doesn't exist. I'm good at it. I've been good at it since before I had the credential to prove it, back when I was 19 and realized my father's business expenses didn't add up and quietly said nothing because I didn't yet understand that saying nothing was its own kind of choice. I understood it later. That lesson cost me years. My family, the Adlers, are not a cruel family by intention. That's the part I've had to sit with for a long time, the part that doesn't resolve cleanly. My father, Gerald, is not a villain. He's a man who believes in fairness the way he defines it, and his definition has always centered around my brother, Marcus. My brother is 4 years older than me, louder than me, and has been my father's vision of what success looks like since the two of them started watching football together when Marcus was 6 and I was 2 and still learning to stand. I don't think my father decided to sideline me. I think he just never decided not to. My mother, Diane, died when I was 11. Her absence left a silence in our house that my father and Marcus filled with noise, and I filled with books and spreadsheets and long walks around the neighborhood alone. My Aunt Patricia, Dad's sister, moved in to help with childcare and stayed for 6 years, leaving when Marcus started college. She and my father share the same instinct. Love Marcus loudly, tolerate Simone quietly. Grandma Ruth was my mother's mother. She had no patience for the Adler family dynamic. She called it a man's house that forgot it had a daughter in it. She drove up from Pueblo every other weekend when I was in middle school, took me to breakfast, listened to me talk, and never once suggested I should be more like Marcus. She was the only person in my childhood who treated my inner life as something worth knowing. When I was 23 and studying for my CPA exam, working double shifts at a restaurant to pay for the exam prep course, Grandma Ruth called me and asked me to come visit. I drove down on a Tuesday in November. She made coffee. We sat at her table. She told me she'd been watching. "You work harder than anyone in this family," she said. "And you get the least back for it. That's going to stop." I didn't know what she meant then. I thought she was going to offer me money and I'd already decided I wouldn't take it. What she offered was different. Ruth Castillo, she'd kept her first husband's name from before she married my grandfather, had spent 40 years building a real estate portfolio across southern Colorado. 11 properties. She'd started with a duplex in Pueblo in 1984, bought with money she'd saved from 15 years of clerical work, and she'd added one property every 3 to 4 years after that, each one bought carefully, managed personally, maintained obsessively. By the time I sat at her kitchen table in 2019, that portfolio was worth approximately $3.2 million, generating $28,000 per month in rental income. My uncle David, her son, my mother's brother, had helped manage the properties for 12 years before a stroke left him unable to work. My father had stepped in as an informal manager starting around 2016, with Marcus running day-to-day operations, collecting rent, scheduling maintenance, handling tenant communications. It was an arrangement Grandma Ruth had accepted out of necessity and observed with growing unease. "Marcus takes his time getting money to me," she told me that Tuesday. "And sometimes the numbers he gives me don't match the numbers I'd expect." She showed me the ledger she kept herself. Handwritten. 12 years of them in a binder she stored behind her cookbooks. I spent 4 hours at that table. By the end, I'd identified what looked like a systematic pattern of underreporting, rent collected but not fully transferred, maintenance invoices for work she couldn't verify, a $7,400 repair bill for a water heater replacement on a property she'd visited 2 months earlier with no new water heater in sight. I told her carefully. I told her I could be wrong. I told her she needed a real attorney, not her granddaughter who hadn't passed her boards yet. She nodded. She already had one. The attorney was a woman named Deborah Fitch, a real estate and estate planning lawyer based in Colorado Springs who had been Grandma Ruth's attorney since 1998. Grandma Ruth had called her before calling me. The forensic review I'd done at the kitchen table was a confirmation, not a discovery. Ruth had already known something was wrong. She'd needed someone she trusted to look at the numbers with her. Someone who wouldn't tell Marcus or Gerald before she was ready. Over the next 8 months, Deborah Fitch completed a full forensic accounting of the portfolio's income and expenses from 2016 through 2019. The findings: Marcus had diverted approximately $218,000 in rental income across 34 months. Not all at once. Never in amounts large enough to draw immediate attention. Between $3,000 and $9,000 at a time, coded as maintenance, repairs, management fees that exceeded agreed-upon percentages. My father had not diverted money directly, but the financial records suggested he'd known the management fees were inflated and said nothing. Grandma Ruth chose not to prosecute. That was her right. She was 79 years old and had no interest in spending her remaining years in depositions and courtrooms over money that, as she told Deborah Fitch, was mine to lose if I chose the wrong people to trust. What she chose instead was to remove the wrong people. In March 2020, Ruth Castillo executed an irrevocable trust transfer. All 11 Colorado properties, deeded in full to a trust with me as sole beneficiary and Deborah Fitch as trustee administrator. The transfer was legally recorded. The properties were no longer in Ruth's name. They were no longer in any Adler's name. They were legally and completely mine. Grandma Ruth told no one. She told me in a phone call the evening after the documents were filed. She said, "It's done. The properties are yours. You don't have to tell them anything until you need to." She paused. "And you might need to." I cried on that phone call. He didn't tell me not to. She just waited until I was done and then she said, "Now go pass your exam." I did. 3 months later. For the next 3 years, my life moved forward in the way that lives do when you're working very hard and not telling anyone why. I passed my CPA boards in June 2020. I joined a forensic accounting firm in Denver in September 2020. A boutique practice that worked primarily with estate disputes and financial fraud cases, which felt, under the circumstances, like the universe had a sense of humor. I was good at my job. I made senior associate by 2022. I had a life outside the work. I ran, not seriously, just enough to clear my head, along the Platte River Trail on Sunday mornings. I had 2 close friends. Kezia, a public defender I'd known since college, and Tom, a landscape architect I'd met at a neighborhood association meeting and stayed friends with after the meeting turned out to be boring and we'd both snuck out to get tacos. We had dinner every few weeks, the 3 of us, in different restaurants around Denver. A ritual that had survived a pandemic and 2 moves and one of Tom's particularly difficult breakups. They knew about my family in the way that close friends know. The shape of it, the weight of it, without every specific detail. My father called occasionally. Dutiful calls, brief. He asked about work in the general way that parents ask about work when they don't quite understand what the work is. Marcus called almost never. When he did, it was usually to mention something he'd bought. A truck, a vacation, a new sound system for his house. In the tone of someone performing financial health for an audience. I visited Grandma Ruth in Pueblo every 6 to 8 weeks. We had coffee. We watched the mountains. She told me about her tenants. She still tracked them, still knew their names, even though she'd handed management to a property management company she'd hired directly after removing Marcus and Gerald in 2020. She told them the management was being professionalized. He did not tell them why. She died in October 2023. Congestive heart failure in her own bed at 83. She'd been declining for 8 months. I'd driven down every other weekend through the summer and I was there the last week. I held her hand the last morning. She didn't say anything profound. She was mostly sleeping. But at one point she opened her eyes and looked at me and gave a very small nod, like she was confirming something she'd decided a long time ago. I drove back to Denver that afternoon. I called Deborah Fitch from the highway. "I know," Deborah said. "I'm sorry, Simone. She was remarkable. Yes, I said. She was. We'll need to talk about next steps. I know, I said. Give me a week. The family meeting was announced by my father via group text 11 days after the funeral. It read, "Family meeting at the house Saturday 2 p.m. to discuss Grandma Ruth's estate. Important that everyone is here." I replied that I'd be there. My brother sent a thumbs up emoji. My Aunt Patricia sent 3. There were 7 cousins in the thread. Marcus's kids weren't old enough to be included, but Patricia's adult children were. Brandon, 29, who worked for Marcus's landscaping company, and Faye, 31, who taught elementary school in Colorado Springs and was the one member of the extended family I genuinely liked and trusted. I texted Faye separately, "Are you coming Saturday?" She replied, "Yes. Simone, I don't know what's going on, but Brandon's been talking to Marcus all week. Something's already decided." I replied, "I know. It's okay." She sent back a question mark. I didn't answer it. I called Deborah Fitch on Thursday. She walked me through what I already knew but needed to hear in professional sequence. The irrevocable trust was filed and recorded in March 2020. All 11 properties had transferred to the Simone Adler Cruz Living Trust. Deborah held the administrative documentation. Ruth's personal will, a separate document, covered her liquid assets, personal effects, and the Pueblo house itself, which she'd maintained in her own name. The will divided those items among her children's families, including a portion to my father as her late daughter's husband. The real estate portfolio was not part of the will because it had not been part of Ruth's estate since 2020. Whatever my family planned to discuss on Saturday, they were planning to divide something that wasn't theirs to divide. I packed the folder Deborah had prepared. Trust documentation. Recorded deed transfers. The forensic accounting summary from 2019 to 2020. A letter from Deborah Fitch, signed and notarized, confirming the trust's current status. I put the folder in my bag. I drove to Pueblo on Saturday morning. I stopped for coffee at the same diner where Grandma Ruth used to take me for breakfast when I was 12. I sat at a table by the window and looked at the mountains. I thought about her hands. Then I drove to the house. The cars in the driveway told me everything. My father's Silverado. Marcus's new Ram 1500, the one he'd called me to mention in September. Patricia's Camry. Brandon's truck. 3 other vehicles I recognized as belonging to cousins. They'd been here a while. The gathering had started without me. I could hear voices through the front door before I opened it. Inside, the living room had been rearranged. The coffee table was pushed to the side. Folding chairs had been brought in from the garage and arranged in a rough semicircle. A whiteboard, someone had brought a whiteboard, stood propped against the far wall with a list written in blue marker. The list was a property breakdown. 11 addresses. Names written next to each one. My brother's name appeared next to 5. My father's next to 3. Patricia's next to 2. One property, a small duplex in Trinidad, had no name beside it, a question mark in its place. My brother Marcus stood at the whiteboard holding the marker like a presenter at a sales meeting. He was 41 years old and had the particular confidence of a man who'd never been significantly wrong about anything in front of people who would tell him so. He saw me come in. His expression didn't change. "Simone," he said. "You made it." "I made it," I said. "We've already gone through the breakdown," he said. He gestured at the whiteboard like he was giving me a tour of something he'd built. "Dad, Patricia, the cousins, we've already divided Grandma's 11 Colorado properties between us. You weren't here, so..." He shrugged. "You get nothing." My father was seated in an armchair by the window. He looked at me briefly, then at his hands. "You were always too busy," he said. Not unkindly. Almost apologetically. "We didn't think you'd want to be involved." 3 of the cousins laughed. Soft, not vicious laughter, the kind that comes from nerves and belonging, from being inside a group and defaulting to its tone. Brandon laughed loudest. Faye, sitting at the edge of the semicircle near the kitchen doorway, did not laugh. She looked at me. Her expression said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would be this direct." I looked at the whiteboard. I looked at the 11 addresses. I looked at Marcus's handwriting. Neat, confident, proprietary. I noticed he'd put his own name next to the 4 highest value properties. I nodded quietly. I said, "Grandma told me you might do this." The laughter stopped. I set my bag on the side table near the door. I unzipped it. I took out the folder. She told me, I continued, walking toward the coffee table that had been pushed aside, setting the folder down on it and opening it, about 2 weeks before she signed the trust documents. She said, when I'm gone, Marcus will call a meeting. Your father will let him run it. They'll divide the properties up before you've finished grieving. She knew you. Marcus's voice tightened. What is that? This is the trust documentation, I said. I turned the top page to face the room. All 11 properties were transferred to an irrevocable trust in March 2020. I am the sole beneficiary. Deborah Fitch, Grandma's attorney, is the trust administrator. I looked up. The properties aren't part of Grandma's estate. They haven't been for 3.5 years. There is nothing on that whiteboard that belongs to any of you. The room was completely silent. Then my Aunt Patricia stood up from her chair. She did not stand up in the way people stand up to look at something more closely. She stood up the way a person stands when their body reacts before their mind catches up. Abrupt, legs straightening, hands coming off the armrest. She looked at the document. She looked at me. And then she screamed. Not a word, just a sound, high and unraveling, the sound of someone who has just watched something they were certain of disappear completely. Brandon said, What does that mean? Marcus crossed the room in 4 steps. He was at the folder before I'd moved. He picked up the top page. He read. His jaw set. I watched his face go through 3 things in about 10 seconds. Disbelief, calculation, fury, and then settle into something colder and harder that I recognized as a man deciding what to do when his exit strategy has just been removed. This isn't legal, he said. It is, I said. She didn't have capacity in 2020. She was 79 with full cognitive function, and her attorney will confirm that in writing. I reached into the folder and produced Deborah's letter. She already has. That's page 4. Marcus read page 4. He put it down slowly. My father said very quietly from his armchair, Simone. Dad. Did you know about this? In 2020. Yes. A long pause. Why didn't you say anything? Because Grandma asked me not to. And because you'd handed her portfolio management to Marcus, and Marcus had been taking money from her for 4 years. The silence that followed was different from the first silence. The first silence was shock. This silence was the kind that happens when a fact lands in a room and everyone present realizes they have to reckon with it. Faye said softly from the doorway, What? The forensic review is in the folder, I said. Starting at page 7. It covers 2016 through March 2020. Total diverted, approximately $218,000 across 34 months. I looked at Marcus. Maintenance invoices for work that wasn't performed. Management fee overages. Rent transfers that consistently fell short of what the tenants paid. I paused. I identified the pattern at Grandma's kitchen table in November 2019. Her attorney completed the formal review. That's why she transferred the properties. Not because she loved me most. Because she needed them protected. Marcus said, That is a lie. Page 7, I said. He didn't turn to page 7. My father was looking at Marcus. Not at me, at Marcus. And Marcus was not looking back at him. For the first time in my life, I watched my father look at my brother and not find what he was looking for. Brandon said, Marcus, is that? Don't, Marcus said, sharply, to Brandon. Brandon stopped. Faye had moved from the doorway into the room. She was standing near me now, not close enough to be theatrical about it, but close enough that her position in the space was a statement. She looked at the folder. She looked at me. She said, When do the properties transfer to your management? They're already under my management, I said. I've retained the same property management company Grandma hired in 2020. The transition is administrative at this point, not operational. So Faye started. The properties were never part of the estate you were planning to divide, I said. Grandma's will is a separate document. It covers her liquid assets, personal effects, and this house. Deborah will distribute those according to the will's terms. That process is unrelated to anything on that whiteboard. Marcus put the folder down. He straightened his jacket. A gesture so habitual and out of place in that moment that it almost made me feel something toward him. Not sympathy exactly. Something more like recognition. This was a man who'd spent his whole life adjusting his presentation and never quite learning that presentation isn't substance. I'll contest it, he said. You can, I said. The grounds would be limited. The trust is irrevocable, properly executed, witnessed, and recorded. But you're welcome to engage an attorney. He stopped. Started again. You planned this. Grandma planned it. I carried it out because she asked me to. She was manipulated. She was a 79-year-old woman who kept 12 years of handwritten rental ledgers behind her cookbooks, I said. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew exactly what you were doing. I picked up the folder. I closed it. She chose me not because she wanted to punish you. She told me that. She chose me because she trusted me with something she'd spent 40 years building, and she needed to know it would be handled honestly. My father stood up from the armchair. He was 67 years old and looked older than that today. He walked to the window, the same window Grandma Ruth used to look out of when she talked about the mountains. He stood there with his back to the room for a moment. Then he said without turning around, I didn't know about the money. I wanted to believe him. The thing about being a forensic accountant is that you understand the difference between knowing and knowing, between awareness and the kind of documented, traceable complicity that can be proven. The forensic review had not established that my father directly knew about the diversions. It had established that he'd let Marcus operate without oversight for 4 years, that the management fee structures he'd signed off on were above standard, and that he was present for at least 2 conversations with Grandma Ruth where she'd expressed concern about the numbers and been reassured that everything was fine. What he chose not to know, he had chosen not to know. I didn't say that out loud. I said, okay, Dad. He turned around. He looked at me. He looked like a man trying to find the version of this moment where he comes out okay and not finding it. Patricia had sat back down. She was holding a tissue she'd produced from somewhere, pressing it to her mouth. She wasn't screaming anymore. She looked the way people look when they realize that the story they've been living in isn't the story, that there was another story happening all along, quieter and more patient, and it has just finished. Marcus picked up the marker from the whiteboard tray. He looked at it. He put it back down. He walked out of the room without saying anything else. The front door opened and closed. His truck started in the driveway. It pulled away. The room breathed. The weeks that followed were not clean. Nothing like this is ever clean. That's the part that the story wants to skip and the part that has to be told. Deborah Fitch began the formal estate distribution within 3 weeks of the family meeting. The liquid assets, Grandma Ruth's savings accounts, 2 small CDs, a brokerage account, totaled $186,000, divided per the will's terms. The Pueblo house, appraised at $340,000, was left to my Uncle David's family, which was Grandma Ruth's recognition of his disability and of the care his wife had provided during his recovery. Personal effects were distributed according to a handwritten attachment Grandma Ruth had made to the will, specific objects to specific people, annotated with reasons. She'd left me her coffee mugs, her binder of rental ledgers, and a letter. I read the letter in my car in Deborah's parking lot. I won't repeat it here. It was private in the way that the most important things are private. Not secret, just belonging to the specific shape of one relationship and not transferable to a general audience. I sat with it for a long time. Then I drove home. Marcus retained an attorney who sent a letter challenging the trust on grounds of undue influence. Deborah's response was 22 pages long and included the cognitive assessments Ruth had voluntarily completed in 2019, the witnessed execution record, and an affidavit from the notary. The challenge was withdrawn 6 weeks later. A separate matter. The forensic accounting summary had been shared with Marcus's attorney as part of the trust documentation. Deborah had also, per Ruth's instructions, included in a sealed addendum opened after her death, reported the financial findings to the Colorado Attorney General's Civil Division. Not criminal charges. Ruth had not wanted that. A civil finding. The AG's office opened a review. It was ongoing as of the time I'm writing this. Marcus had used the rental income to fund renovations on his own house, 2 car purchases, and, as the forensic trace eventually showed, approximately $44,000 in payments to a company that was, upon inspection, his wife's sister's LLC. His wife filed for divorce in February. I did not engineer any of that. I want to be precise about this. The documents existed. The findings existed. The consequences followed the evidence. I didn't pull the thread. Grandma Ruth had pulled the thread in 2019 when she sat at her kitchen table with her binder behind her cookbooks and decided that enough was enough. My father called me in December. We talked for 40 minutes, which was longer than we'd talked in years. He didn't apologize in so many words. He said, "I should have paid more attention." He said, "Your grandmother saw you more clearly than I did." He said, "I'm sorry for that." I told him I heard him. I didn't tell him it was fine because it wasn't entirely fine and he deserved an honest response more than a comfortable one. We agreed to have dinner in January. We had it. It was awkward and careful and real in a way that our previous dinners hadn't been, and I think that was better. Faye texted me the week after the family meeting. "I want you to know I think Grandma was right." Then, after a pause, "Also, I always thought something was off with those numbers. I just didn't say anything. Then I should have." I told her we all have things we should have said earlier. She said she was going to stop letting that be true going forward. I told her me too. I manage the 11 properties now. Not personally, the management company handles the day-to-day, but as the trust's beneficiary, the decisions are mine. I've walked every property. I know the tenants' names. I fix things that need fixing. I'm building a reserve fund the way Grandma Ruth would have, slowly and carefully. Not for growth exactly but for permanence. The kind of financial foundation that doesn't depend on anyone else's goodwill or anyone else's honesty. I still run the Platte River Trail on Sunday mornings. I still have dinner with Kezia and Tom every few weeks. Tom has started dating someone new. A woman who, by his description, is alarming in the best way. Kezia is taking on a wrongful conviction case that she says will either make her career or end her entirely. And she says this with the same expression, so I'm not sure which way she's leaning. My apartment has too many houseplants. I still don't use the standing desk standing. Some things that are true at the same time. I have the properties. I also don't have my grandmother. I have a more honest relationship with my father than I've had since childhood. I've also had to accept that our relationship will always carry the weight of the years when it was something else. I have Faye, who is becoming a real cousin in a way she wasn't before. I've lost Marcus. Not dramatically, not in a single moment, but in the gradual way you lose someone who was never quite seeing you, only seeing what you could offer or threaten. I keep the coffee mugs Grandma Ruth left me. I use them. Every morning I fill one of them and I sit at my kitchen window and I look at whatever is out there. The city, mostly the buildings, the slice of sky between them, and I hold it with both hands the way she did and I think about what she built. She built it slowly. She built it honestly. She built it in a world that didn't always look at her and see someone building something. And then she handed it to someone she trusted and she let it go. I don't take that lightly. I try to be worth it. That's all you can do in the end. You try to be worth what the people who believed in you believed.